Welcome to The Broker Experience. We are your hosts. My name is Rick Dulai. I'm joined by Rob Scalisi and Chuck Cascioni. And today we're going to kind of try to focus on a particular topic, ambiguous clauses in our contracts. And I think there's a lot we can discuss here. There's a lot of examples we can get into. But first...
we want to say happy birthday to my business partner, Rob Scalisi, and very good friend. Happy birthday, buddy.
Yep, happy birthday.
Thanks. This is a milestone, 60 today.
Yeah, wow.
You know,
60.
it's a little surreal for sure.
I look more like 60 than you do.
Hey, by the way, it was Rick's birthday 2 days ago, so happy birthday to Rick, too.
Thank you.
Didn't you turn 50?
Yeah, and I turned 50.
So milestones for both of us.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, 100%.
Wow.
You know,
Fun
I got
stuff.
licensed in February of '89, so this makes 34 years of being a licensed
That's crazy.
realtor slash
I think
broker.
I got licensed in February also.
Yeah, you were
It was
88?
Like 88, I think, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long time. So hopefully your guys' experience will pay off in today's podcast.
We'll
See, there's that word
We'll
again,
see.
experience. The
There you
segue
go.
to the title of this
We're here for the
podcast.
experience.
All right, well, let's get into it. There are several examples of clauses that people use that if they're not done properly, they make no sense. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking about seller concessions, appraisal guarantees, maybe any language associated with occupancy. What other ones can you
Well,
guys
that's
think of?
why the lawyers tell us we're licensed to fill in the blanks.
Right.
We're not really licensed to create those clauses. So
That's a good point.
it-
So really,
you know,
really, we should be creating these clauses and having an attorney review them before we use them, or just have the attorney create them.
them and then cut and paste them is what really would be the right way to do it.
Yeah.
Is that just a disclaimer for us?
It's a suggestion, like a lot of the things on the purchase agreement. A suggestion.
I get it. We're not attorneys, so there's our disclaimer again.
Yeah.
But I have also seen attorneys come up with stuff that doesn't make sense in real
Stupid
estate.
stuff
You
as
know,
well, yeah.
Right. That's why you got to have your own attorney that you trust and you know they're good.
yeah, that's what we do. We come up with a clause and then run it by our attorney.
Exactly.
Is that disclaimer number 3?
There you go.
What was the old thought process? If you can ask the question, then what?
Yeah.
On the clause, it's not finished. The clause isn't finished. If you can
right.
ask the question, if it says, seller to provide, to fix the light bulb or something, or fix the light socket.
Yeah.
Or what?
And that's it?
Yeah.
If you can say or what, or then what, the clause isn't
Clause
finished.
isn't finished.
You got to finish it and say seller to repair electrical to the buyer's satisfaction, or the buyer has the option to declare this offer null and void.
Right.
That would finish the clause.
Yeah. I think
You
you
know.
guys have also taught us have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like if there's no end to it, then
Yeah, if it's
just
open-ended,
open-ended
same
now.
thing,
Yeah,
yeah.
anything can happen. And I guess, like you said, electrical repair. Sometimes this happens when you're holding escrow for repairs,
Right.
right? It's got to be very clear how much is going to be held and how is it going to be determined that it's okay to disperse the amount and who you're dispersing it to. It all has to be in there.
I think with all of these clauses that we could probably pick these 3, right?
Yeah.
Seller concessions, appraisal guarantees, and any sort of escrow for repairs, and just elaborate on those
Yeah.
and fill up this whole podcast with just that. The first or most relevant one to me right now is appraisal guarantees.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just try to, remember a couple of them the way they were written and then give an example as to my interpretation. We can talk about intent from the other agent and what they meant. And obviously, when you do these things, even when they're written incorrectly, if buyers and sellers both do what they intended to do, it's not a problem. It's only a problem once it becomes a problem, right? And then
right.
you start, analyzing the exact language, and then attorneys get involved and blah, blah,
The
blah.
judge will be analyzing what the intent was.
But this is, the appraisal guarantee. We all know that the market has been very competitive, so people are offering over asking prices and then adding language that says, the buyer agrees to guarantee the appraisal up to $30,000, or the buyer agrees to pay $30,000 more than the appraised value. So, just thinking of an example, you have a house that's listed for $320,000.
Yeah.
They come in with an offer of $350,000, so they're already $30,000 over your asking price. And the agent will put that language on there that says the buyer agrees to pay $30,000 over the appraised value. Now, what do you think their intent was? They're thinking it might appraise for $320,000, and they'll still give you that $350,000.
Right.
But as an example, so if I'm the listing agent and don't do my due diligence for my seller and have my seller sign that clause, let's just say as an example, the house appraises at $350,000
or $250,000. Okay, either way.
Well, let's talk about $350,000. Does that mean that the seller now gets $380,000?
$380,000, right.
Well, the buyer's agents can say, well, that's not what we meant.
Right.
What you wrote, though, is that the buyer agrees to pay $30,000 over the appraised value.
Yeah.
But the reverse is also true. If it appraised for $250,000, let's say,
does the seller have to sell for $280,000?
Right.
Does it go to $280,000? Yeah, and which is neither one of those work.
Yeah. I was just trying to look up the wording of the way we came up for our clause, but you pretty much have it memorized.
I could probably recite it, and it would be something to the effect of the purchaser agrees to pay up to $30,000 over the appraised value if the appraisal comes in less than the offered purchase price.
Right.
In the event the appraisal comes in below X number, all parties reserve the right to renegotiate the contract. And then I think we put a third part saying that the maximum agreed upon purchase price shall not exceed the offer price.
Right.
Or the final accepted offer price.
Yeah, you pretty much closed it in all ways because, again, this is much more relevant when you have a hot market and people are bidding over asking price. And what you're trying to say is my offer price is $30,000 over asking, and I'm only guaranteeing the difference. And so you have to make sure that you're not over committing to a price that's more than what you're offering. And then if it comes in significantly less, the seller isn't being forced to sell it at a price they don't agree with.
Right.
And some agents may say, well, why are you worried about what the seller does? Well, if I'm the listing agent,
I care what
happens to the seller, and I want to know where is that number? What is the finite number that the seller may still want to proceed with the transaction?
Right.
So again, if we use that same example, it's listed at $320,000. They get an offer of $350,000 with a $30,000 appraisal guarantee. Well, they originally were asking $320,000. If the appraisal comes in at $290,000, as an example, plus that $30,000 appraisal guarantee, they technically still got a full price offer on what they originally intended to get.
Right.
They may be satisfied with that number.
That could be satisfied, right.
And you doesn't even have to be that, well, hey, the asking price was $320,000 minus that appraisal guarantee amount. What if the seller said, hey, you know what? God, we're asking $320,000. It would be good if we sold this house at $310,000.
Yeah.
Obviously, $350,000 is better,
right,
but we could still get on with our lives, do our next transaction at $310,000. Maybe that bottom number's, hey, if the appraised value comes in less than $280,000, we renegotiate.
But
the
up
$280,000
to
plus the $30,000 still gets. So that's a conversation that really needs to be explained to the seller, and the conversation being had between the listing agent and the seller. And I do see a lot of agents that make the mistake of, just because a buyer's agent wrote this clause that's ambiguous, they feel that they have to have their seller sign it. You can cross it out and put the language on there that is right.
Exactly. I have noticed that buyer's agents that did that, and I put our clause in clarifying all the boundaries, they appreciated it. Never once were they like, no,
we're not using your form.
I don't understand what you're saying. You're tricking us. I've never had that. They understood that. Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't even, because they didn't think about it. They just put their.
Well, hopefully with the interest rates the way they are and the market cooling off a little bit, that we won't have to worry about this anymore.
So much,
it's you're right. It has to be. And again, you got to read the clause and you got to understand the meaning. And a meeting of the minds means all parties agree to that, what that says.
Right.
So, you just got to be on guard and watch that.
And honestly,
you know
like
what
you
that
said, like
clause is saying.
even as a buyer's agent, I still might want to write it in a way that helps the seller in the sense that it just clarifies and makes the deal smoother. I'm not helping them at the cost of my client.
Right.
I'm actually helping them at the benefit of my client, which is the most important part.
Exactly.
And when you really think about, being the listing agent in the market that we've been in, where typically you're receiving these multiple offers with these appraisal guarantees or other offerings to the seller, right? When are you as the seller or the listing agent in the best position to button up that contract and get it the way you want it? Right out of the gate, right?
Right.
So to your point, Rick, is there's not going to be an agent that says, oh, no, my buyer's not signing that.
Right.
They're basically saying, hey, you want me to go wash your car? Whatever we need to do to get this offer accepted, we'll do it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think and maybe just let's clarify what we mean exactly by appraisal guarantee. I know we kind of just explained how to write it, but appraisal guarantee specifically, we're talking about when a buyer writes an offer and there's a question about whether the property can appraise for that offer price. So if it didn't, our contract states that the buyer can back out, they can get their EMD back and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But an appraisal guarantee is something that reassures the seller that you're sticking in it, even if it doesn't appraise. We're just putting limits on what that amount is. So that's the whole point of the appraisal guarantee, is to let the seller know that we want it, even if it doesn't appraise, but only within this range.
And hope and pray that the market doesn't take a dip after that, because then you're upside down in the house. So,
right.
Like I said, I don't like appraisal guarantees, and I don't agree with them, but it is a fact of life in the business today, and I really wouldn't advise somebody to sign one, but sometimes you have to.
A year ago, we were not only were we doing appraisal guarantees, we were also doing like inspection waivers.
Right.
These are all things that we don't really want to do. We want to advise our buyers not to do these things.
Right.
But in that market, if the buyer is desperate for that house, you kind of have to do it. So if we have to do it, we might as well do it the best way possible.
I hate them. I don't like them, but I did one for my son. My son wrote, we said we're buying the house at this price, no matter what it appraises for. Right. It was an unlimited on his, because I knew the numbers. I knew what it was going to come in at, and luckily it did come in at the sale price. So we didn't have to really appraise anything. And he had plenty of money down. So.
Yeah, I had a deal in Troy last year where we listed it for $450. First offer, first day, the agent brought a home inspector to the showing, did their inspection, wrote a no inspection offer because they were satisfied with that, did an appraisal guarantee. The offer was $510. We were $60,000 over asking price. The first appraisal came back at $450.
Wow.
And they were
besides themselves.
Yeah, they were like, oh my God, we have to come up with $60,000. They weren't prepared to really do that. Their agent went to work. She was a rock star. She went to work. She's calling the lender. She's pulling comps. She's arguing everything she could. They do a second appraisal. Second appraisal comes back at $510.
Isn't that funny too?
Yeah, that is.
Everybody wanted the deal to happen.
As you know, an appraisal is a snapshot in time. It is an opinion of value, and the appraisal is there to protect the bank.
Yeah.
Not the buyer. The appraisal is there to protect the bank from lending too much money on the property.
Well, let me ask you,
so
though,
that they don't get hurt.
Then why does the buyer pay for it?
Because the bank set the rules up.
If it doesn't help the buyer, it's to justify the loan to the bank. The bank wants to be safe with their loan.
Right.
Then why is the buyer paying for it?
Well, they want to buy the house, so the bank figure this is a charge you're going to bear to make sure that we can lend you the money.
Doesn't want to buy the house.
That's true. And there are some lenders that will cover it if you use their title company and stuff like that, right? I mean, I've seen a couple of those.
The appraisal, while we're on that topic, and remind me to come back because I have two more points on the appraisal guarantee that I don't want to forget.
Okay.
One of them was FHA and appraisal guarantees, just in case
Good point.
forget where I was going.
That's a good.
Because for our listeners, none of this that we do is scripted. This is all just fluid conversation. So if we get off topic, you might have to reel us back in. But since you're not here to do that,
I'll play that role.
You're going to get what you get.
Okay.
So with appraisals, right, they are an opinion of value. And I've often said that, part of the true definition of a real estate value, right, the textbook definition is this: buyer willing to pay, seller willing to accept.
Right.
Provided
100%.
it's an arm's length transaction, which means the parties are not related, sellers aren't selling due to divorce, foreclosure, bankruptcy, etc., right? And parties are educated about the market.
Right.
So what's that mean? As a buyer, it could mean a lot of things, right? You're out looking at a dozen, 20, 30, 40, 60 houses before you make this decision that led you to the one you want to buy.
Yeah.
Right? The sellers are educated, hopefully, through their listing agent saying, hey, here's recently sold similar or comparable properties, and here's what they got, and here's this range of value, and you have this, and they didn't have this, or they had this, and you don't have that, and you're coming up with a number where you think a consumer who's out shopping is going to agree with that number.
Yeah, this is usually part of your listing appointment. You come prepared with all this.
So parties are educated, and it's always amazing to me that a buyer, especially it seems to be my buyers, nobody ever goes out and looks at one house, I'll take it. You know, it's 60 houses, 3 months later.
It used to be that way when I first started. You'd show them 3 and then they'd buy one.
Like HGTV, right? House Hunters. Here's the 3, right? Yeah, that's a show. But anyway, so these buyers finally come to a decision as to what they're willing to pay.
Yeah.
When does the appraiser show up? For the one house the buyer decided on.
Right.
Who sees more houses? The agents, right, with the buyers and the buyer, not the appraiser.
True.
And yet this appraiser gets to render the decision as far as value. And what I think is very leading to them is they get a copy of what that buyer paid and what the seller accepted. The purchase agreement.
Get a copy of the purchase
up
agreement,
front. To me,
I think is totally ridiculous. If you want an opinion of value, have the appraiser be blind. He does not know what and they do this because they don't want him to come in higher, or they don't want him to come in lower, or he's trying to meet that number, really, is what he's trying to do. But if that appraiser was truly blind and said, look, based on all of my research, this house is $400,000 and your purchase agreement says $380,000, bingo, the buyer made out, seller feels like they got a little gypped. But truly, by giving them a copy of that purchase agreement, the appraiser say, oh yeah, you got value, which is ridiculous.
And it also seems like let's say the purchase price was $380,000 and pull the comps and they come up with, oh, this could be $400,000. It seems like they purposely then justify it down to the $380,000. They specifically want to get to your number just to say, okay, yeah, your purchase price is okay.
Hit value, right.
And I've said that to buyers over the years, right? When the appraisal comes in at the exact number that they agreed upon, I tell them, I'm the smartest agent on the planet. I pinpoint the exact dollar that this house that you wanted to buy is worth, right?
Right.
And that's when we go on a listing appointment, I tell sellers, I don't want to know what you think it's worth. Don't lead me to your number.
Right.
I'm going to do my analysis. I'm going to come up with what's called a range of value, low, median, average, high, whatever the case is. Interpret the market, lack of inventory, still high buyer demand, whatever that is, and say, so I tend to think that,
things like that.
you're going to end up at the high side, or I think that based on these comps, you're going to be towards the lower side. But the market's truly going to dictate, right?
Yeah.
So if that house or offers come in at anywhere in that given range, the seller should be happy.
Right.
And that deal should close and appraise and everything else. And I always thought that the appraisers should have to do it the same way. Give us a range of what you think this house is worth.
That's a good point.
And if the buyer's purchase agreement falls into that range anywhere low or high, we're good. Stamp it good and close.
That's an interesting point.
But again, it's the reason for that appraisal is to protect the bank's interest. The bank wants to be covered by a 20% equity position. Whether they let you put less down or not, well, then they have insurance for that. But the bank wants to be covered to say we are not lending more than 80% of value on this property.
Right.
That's why they won't do the range of value, you know.
Okay, but the thing is that there's a good point there, because even the word appraisal, I don't know anything about jewelry or anything, but when you appraise jewelry, you seem to get a actual value of what that thing is worth. You know,
Well, you get an insurance value, in my opinion, on that kind of
okay,
stuff.
so I don't really know a lot about it. You might be able to elaborate, but it seems like when you think about things getting appraised, like artwork or jewelry or something, that they're using some kind of system to say this is what it's worth. But when it comes to homes and these deals, they're looking at our purchase agreement.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, the appraiser should be blind, in my opinion. I mean, and you would get a fair opinion of value, and we, you know, I might be shooting myself in the foot, because if that happens and now 5 deals fall apart because of this, that, you know, shame on me. But I think that it is, to get a true opinion of value, the appraiser has to be blind, cannot see that purchase agreement.
Yeah,
I
He
agree.
looks at the market, he looks at the comps, or he or she, and says that the value is, you know, 400, not, the purchase agreement says 380 and I'm going to hit 380.
Right.
I don't know, and I think that values are all fluid anyway. Go back to the definition: buyer willing to pay, seller willing to accept. And you know, if you look at textbook idea, right, the bigger house should be worth more than the smaller house in the same neighborhood, same style of house, same year built, etc. But it doesn't work that way. You know, maybe the smaller one had higher end finishes or a swimming pool, or maybe the smaller house was across the street from grandma's house and grandma's going to watch the kids. So is that buyer willing to pay more for that particular property because it fits that need?
Right.
That's a definition of value. Why is that valuable to that buyer?
Right. But I think going back to Chuck's point too, a snapshot in time, when you think about it, if the market is going up, the appraisal is always going to be short.
Right, because appraisals are looking at
what happened
data.
Right?
So in that theory, a house would never go up in value.
Right.
Because if we always have to look back 6 months, then we're going to be looking at those values. Unless somebody pays cash, you're never going to be able to get a higher appraiser.
Right.
Appraisal.
And then they won't use the cash ones anyway.
Right.
And if the market's going down, there should be so much equity when you're getting a deal every time, because the previous prices were higher.
And that's what's flawed about the system. But I mean, it is a good checks and balance system. It's out there, and
we understand why they're
better.
Then I still think that, you know, a lot of the power for those values is the consumer, both buyer and seller consumer, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I've used this as an example over and over. Years ago, I had a 1978 Corvette pace car. Yeah. I bought this thing with 65 miles on it. I mean, this was a brand new car, right? So when I went to get insurance for the car, they said, we're going to need to get an appraisal. Well, that appraisal came back at $40,000. Now I paid $17,000 for the car. So what am I thinking?
You got a deal.
I hit pay dirt, right?
Wait till I go sell it.
Wait till I sell it. So this is where I'm going with the story, Rick. So now along come the kids, and I have this car sitting in my garage. It's got no miles on it still, and I decide to sell it. So I'm thinking, I'm going to put it up $40,000. The appraiser says it's worth $40,000. How many buyers at $40,000, Rick?
Zero.
How many at 30, Rick?
Zero.
How many at 25, Rick?
Zero.
What did I sell the car for?
12.
$18,000. What was the car worth? $18,000.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect example. All right. We don't want to forget, going back to appraisal guarantees and FHA. What's the problem?
So here's where this was presented to me. House that I had a buyer on, wrote an offer. He was a conventional buyer, and multiple offer situation. The listing agent accepted an FHA offer on the house because they wrote an appraisal guarantee. Now, as you know, on an FHA offer, there's a thing called an amendatory clause.
Yep.
And the amendatory clause has to be filled in, and it says that the buyer is not obligated to buy this house if it doesn't appraise for, and the purchase price goes in that little blank. Right. So on the purchase agreement, it had the appraisal guarantee language that they're willing to pay X over appraised value.
Right.
House comes in light on the appraisal.
Which clause works?
Which clause applied? The one that says they're paying over, the one that said it had to appraise for the sales price. Well, when the buyer got cold feet and decided they didn't want the house,
got to pick.
guess what they hung their hat on?
Yeah,
the mandatory clause.
Now, so the listing agent made a mistake by not clarifying that.
Yeah, right.
And as it turns out, according to the loan officer, it didn't matter if they had that other clause on the purchase agreement. FHA loans can't do an appraisal guarantee.
Oh, really? Yeah. So
No.
it's not even allowed. So it didn't even count, but it was an effort to make a more attractive offer.
Yeah. So, which of course worked well for me because my buyer at the time hadn't purchased anything yet. So they called me back. And of course the listing agent was, I wish I would have just accepted your offer in the first place. Not him, but had his seller.
Right.
But they got caught up in that. And again, the listing agent was newer. I mean, I'm thinking I would have caught that and say, which one you talking about? Because you got two different numbers here.
Right. Yeah. Even without knowing that FHA wouldn't take an appraisal guarantee, you should have at least raised a flag saying that, hey, you got two different.
It's a potential problem.
Right.
It's
a conflict.
Two conflicting clauses that which one's going to prevail.
Right.
Yeah. That word supersede would have played well in one of those clauses.
Right.
Yes. Somebody would have to say that explicitly. Did you say there was 2 points though you had?
There was. And saving of the fluidity here, it's okay. Escaped my mind. It may come back.
If it does, we'll just hit it then. And the other one that's a good one to talk about is seller concessions. It's so simple, but there are some things that I think a lot of people don't think about. Why don't you first of all explain what a seller concession is, and then explain the problem with how typically we see seller concessions written into a purchase agreement.
So the concession is simply, depending on what type of loan, because there are limits that the buyer is getting, whether it's conventional financing, 5% down, 10% down, 20% down, et cetera, or FHA financing or VA financing. They all have different limits on what a seller can contribute back out of their proceeds to assist the buyer in the way of prepaid bank items or closing costs, right? And, as an example with VA, the seller can pay 100% of that veteran's closing costs.
Okay.
Because the loan is designed for the veteran to get into the house for zero down.
But let's clarify. What are we calling closing costs?
Fees affiliated with buying the house, getting the loan.
With closing the loan.
Yeah, but so
discount point, prepaid taxes, prepaid insurance,
Does that include down payment?
It does not include down payment.
Right,
and first of all, with a VA, there is zero down payment.
Right.
So prepaid items could be the 1-year homeowner's insurance policy up front.
Okay.
The proration of taxes are prepaid items.
Right.
An appraisal is a prepaid item.
Yep.
Closing costs,
loan origination fees,
interest from the date of closing to the next first of the month.
Right. Okay.
Because usually the payments start the next first of the month, so that's a prepaid item as well.
Here's the mistake or the problem with that, with any of these concessions, right? And I've seen this in listings, right? Seller will not pay buyer concessions.
Yeah.
Does that mean they're absolutely not negotiable on their asking price?
Right.
Again, an example would be, hey, they're asking $100,000. Maybe they want to get 95 out of the house.
Yeah.
Assuming the house would appraise at 100 and we offer 100 and we could use $5,000 of closing costs or prepaid items. Seller still gets their 95. Buyer got the closing costs paid for. Seller wouldn't do that. Well, the listing agent, would consider doing that.
Yeah.
But that's not what your listing ticket said.
Yeah, but even if you say, okay, you're asking 100, we'll buy it for 105, but we need the seller to get, because we don't have a lot of cash on hand.
And in that case, all the buyer is doing is financing in their closing cost. Okay, that's done in new car sales, new boat sales, new camper sales, or whatever. But so it can happen.
And that's a good approach, provided that, again, we got to go back to that appraisal thing. Right? You can't just throw this money on top of the asking price, because what if that seller's asking price is already inflated?
True.
We got to look at sold comps going, where do we think the appraiser's going to land the value?
Yeah.
And can that number be finessed in there to accommodate all parties?
Yeah.
So you have to be smart enough to look at all of that.
Right.
But the thing is, now FHA loans, right? They have a 96.5% loan.
Right.
So the buyer, 3.5% down payment. It has to be their funds or a gift from a close personal friend or relative. Can't be the seller giving it.
Can't be the
includes
seller.
their realtor, which includes their grandma, their aunt, their uncle. And they also have savings accounts you can set up for that. So instead of having a wedding shower or a baby, a shower like that, that you can actually start a bank account for the
3.5 down.
For the 3.5% or for the future buyer of the house.
Oh wow!
Some banks will set that up.
That's helpful too. So then, in that case, because the seller can't gift it, so they have to have the 3.5% somehow.
Correct.
They have ways they can get it, but then the seller can still pay
up to 6%.
Up to 6%
of the sales price.
Yeah, that's the key words of the sales price.
Right.
In the way of those concessions, and as the price goes up on the purchase price of the house, right, as that gets higher, 6% would never be used.
Right.
So
you can't burn up all
there's
that
no
money.
way, because those closing costs, a good chunk of it are prorated taxes and the setting up of the escrow account for future taxes and insurance. That's a huge part of it.
Right.
Bank closing costs, whether you're getting a 20% down conventional loan, FHA loan, VA loan, the actual closing costs don't vary that much. So we as consumers or even realtors will say the closing cost. There's really bank closing costs, and then there's the prepaid items. There's two different, there really are two different things. The consumer knows them as closing costs. And that's why the concession thing is it's allowable for closing cost and prepaid items.
Yeah.
Not to exceed. But one of the most common mistakes that we see that's just kind of comical, agents will say, the seller to pay 3% of the buyer's closing costs.
Right. That's not what you mean.
What does that mean?
So I like really? So the closing costs were $9,000.
Yeah.
So you're asking my seller to contribute $270 towards that $9,000?
Right.
Well, that's not what we meant.
Right.
That is what it says.
That's what it says. But
and it's a good thing I caught it, because I'll fix it, because I want this thing to close.
Right.
But imagine if you hung your hat on that and went to closing and said, nope.
Here's your $175.
That's what it says.
Right.
Well, and Rick, this is why we try to bring this to light, because obviously the idea is to get your seller to the closing table, and and to dig your heels in and say, hey, I'm gonna that $270. Now the buyer probably can't even buy the house, and you've dragged this thing out to the finish line, and just to prove a point, and it's. So you try to take that higher road and say, hey, listen, let's clarify this. But you have to be aware of these things because, again, an agent intent, right? I know what they meant.
Yeah, and to be honest, even all the title companies are going to say, yeah, we know what they meant.
Right. The lenders sometimes say, we know what they meant.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what it
says, though.
Right.
And even done correctly, it can be a point of contention. You kind of hinted at this. It's up to this amount. It may not all get used up, and the seller might be happy about that, and the buyer might be upset about that, thinking, no, I want to squeeze every dollar out of what the seller has agreed to give me, figure out ways to pay more of my stuff, right?
You bring up a good point.
You could pay a discount point. You could do, there are other ways you could use that money that was not going to be used, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes it just doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah, so you can only use, or the bank lending the money to the buyer can only use what is actual. They cannot use something that isn't there. So if we exceed, they've agreed to pay $14,000 and all we have is 10 in fees.
Yeah, it's not like you get a $4,000 check now.
That $4,000 would remain back.
If it was that high, the buyer's agent might have an issue and say, "Well, we're going to lower the price then by that $4,000," or they would come up
if
with
it was a
something
big difference.
If it was a big difference,
and that's
but
again,
most of the time
when you're the buyer's agent, probably a good idea to say, "Hey, we're doing concession. Here's the potential purchase price. Here's the property taxes. Here's our best guesstimate for homeowners insurance." Give me your best estimate on what's going to be actual. Because I don't want to also, put my buyer at a disadvantage if I'm presenting an offer to a listing agent and we're saying, hey, we want you to cover 12. So now the seller has it in their head. They're going to give up $12,000 of this money when the actual money we needed was only $7,000.
Right.
Give them actual, because then we can negotiate in better faith, right? And the seller knows closer to what they can expect.
That's why you want to use a good lender too, because a good lender knows the numbers. They're pretty close.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to, I mean, they may be off a couple bucks, but they're not going to be off, you know, $6,000, $5,000. They're going to be off $300, $400, $500 maybe.
Yeah. And I think that's also, it shows some level of maturity and professionalism to make it clean, make it tight, make it so that it works and closes. And if you're kind of new to the business, you might be tempted to look like a hero to your client and think, oh, I'm going to squeeze this out of the other side or something. But really what you're doing is you're just setting the whole thing up for failure.
Right. Exactly.
You might as well get the numbers right. Don't try to take advantage of somebody else, the other side's. I mean, yes, it's an antagonistic process. You're negotiating, but it doesn't have to be like with animosity. It can be working together.
I'm all for negotiating hard up front, but negotiating in good faith.
Right.
You know, negotiate hard on price or hard on your, you know, concessions or whatever. But you know, once it's solidified, then make the transaction happen and make it get to closing.
You know, and it also depends on what market you're in. And, you know, markets of recent years, it's like there were still a lot of offers that got presented and needing concessions.
Yeah,
and you know, you just
don't. The seller doesn't need to take those in the seller's market.
A year ago, nothing.
Yeah,
I mean, there was no such thing as concessions.
Yeah, you'd be crazy asking for concessions.
Had an FHA buyer a year ago, man, you were showing a lot of houses because every offer they would write, you couldn't get it through because people were paying cash and over asking and appraisal guarantees and waiving inspections, and I mean honestly, it was ridiculous. It's kind of the worst I've ever seen it a year ago in all the time I've been in the business. Back in, I don't know, what, 93-ish or so, you know, we would list a house at 9 a.m. and it was sold by noon. Multiple offers, you know, you were presenting offers. That's back when we used to have to drive the offer to the other agent's office and 3 of us sit in the lobby and present our offers, you know, but this past April was even worse than that.
Yeah.
You know, way over asking price and appraisal.
And people were coming up with tricks to get around it. You know, like I said, bring your inspector to your showing and things like that.
It's kind of ingenious.
It was pretty smart. But I had at least one agent called and complained, and another agent complained too. But she had also brought an inspector with her. She just didn't.
What she complained? She just because they did it before her.
They were the first ones. Their offer is the one that got accepted. And I mean, honestly, that agent had done everything perfect. You know, first showing as soon as it was available because we had it coming.
Brought
soon.
Their home inspector. So
brought the home
that
inspector.
Clause,
she actually
did an
also
appraisal guarantee.
She actually booked 2 appointments back to back because they were 30-minute appointments.
Oh, that was during COVID or COVID
well,
protocol?
yeah, I mean, but it was like, exactly, because you could only do up to 30 minutes.
Right.
So she booked 2 back to back, and we never noticed because showings were coming in hand over fist.
Right.
We didn't even notice it was the same person. So yeah, it gave her a little bit unfair advantage, but it gave her an unfair advantage because she was hustling. Right. Not because she was doing anything unethical.
Right.
So.
It's funny how that's perceived, right? Somebody being a little think out of the box, right?
Right.
And aggressive in a market like you had to be, and other agents are like, that's not right.
Yeah, that's not fair.
That's not fair.
Well, okay, you're slow.
Oh, I thought about my other point. Oh,
yeah.
To bring to light is when people do these big appraisal guarantees, maybe as the listing agent, you want to make sure that the person actually has that extra cash.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Very good point.
You know, because I've seen that happen too, right? We guaranteed it for 30 or 50 grand and we don't have the money.
We don't have that.
Or asking for proof of funds and then they give a documentation that shows money, but not their name on the document.
Yeah.
Like, how do I know that's your money?
Or just the proof of funds is enough to cover how much they're putting down.
Right. And
it's like, no, you need the amount to put down plus what you guaranteed.
Shortage. Exactly. You know, so we ran into that this morning with one of our agents, and she ran into a situation where somebody wrote a cash deal and the non-contingent about selling anything, but it turns out that she has her other house to sell, or that was sold, but without that closing of her existing house, she didn't have the cash to buy the new house.
Right.
Well, that's not a cash deal. It's kind of a contingent deal.
It's a
72-hour contingency, or it's a contingent deal, but she didn't disclose it was a contingent deal.
Right.
So
and then now you're at this point where you're kind of already
you're already stuck.
So
What can you do?
Okay, so going back to seller concessions, what is the proper way to? Okay, this is not legal advice, so nobody should.
It's real estate advice, Rick. It's real estate advice.
Just clarifying.
Yeah. So
what would be the proper way to write a seller concession clause?
So I would, have this committed to memory. I think it's been a while since I had to do a concession deal, but the seller's contributions for the purchaser's prepaid interest, taxes, insurance, closing cost, underwriting fee, tax service fee, or any allowable mortgage cost not to exceed X.
Perfect. Right. Yeah, so you pretty much cover all the bases. And a seller could say, hey, look, I'll do, but I don't want to pay all of them. I'll just pay their closing fee and
normally
something.
The seller's going to say, I'll agree to it. They pay this amount. You offered and you wanted 3% of the sale price on a $100,000 house, $3,000. I only want to pay $2,000, or I only want to pay $1,500.
Yeah, I'll give you $2,000.
So we'll cap it to, seller to pay all prepaid items and/or closing costs not to exceed $1,500 or $1,800 or whatever number that they did agree to.
And the way you pretty much worded it gets you to max out everything you can use it for, right?
And it doesn't have ambiguity. To be all or nothing. I mean, a seller doesn't have to do all. If it came to $6,390.22. If they agreed to pay $1,900, I mean, that's it. And it's not allocated like, it went for this item or that item or that item.
Right.
Just
less out of the buyer's pocket.
Yeah. Debits and credits. It's just an accounting statement. Right. Here's all your fees to buy. Here's the credits that you had. Here's a credit from the seller. A minus B equals C.
Right. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so we covered appraisal guarantees. We covered seller concessions. This one isn't something that we typically write in as a clause because it's already in most purchase agreements. But like occupancy, there is some ambiguity with occupancy because it's like having a lease without having a real lease, and who's responsible for what?
It's not only ambiguous. Well, it's not only a problem. It's a problem. It's not only ambiguous. Sometimes it's a problem. For instance, when I lease a home that I own or a house or rental property that I have, I get a credit check. I get all their information.
Right.
I get a security deposit.
Right.
And they sign a lease. And then in the lease, it will stay, hey, if you don't pay, you don't stay. If you do hold over, here's what happens. And all of those types of things. In our purchase agreements, it really doesn't go that far. It says, hey, we're going to live here for 30 days and pay you $30 a day, for that time frame. Well, what if they don't get out? What is there a security deposit? Is there, is there an inspection?
No, but that's a really good question. So let's say the seller does not, so you agree to 30-day occupancy. Title company is going to hold a certain amount in escrow now for those 30 days.
Right.
At the end of those 30 days, the seller moves out and the new owner gets a check from the title company. Right?
Correct.
But let's say the previous owner, the seller, doesn't move out. What do you do?
You're evicting them.
You have to go through a formal eviction.
Right, so you're going to go through a formal eviction.
Which is going to take at least 2 to 3 weeks. Well, in a normal time, it's 2 to 3 weeks to get into court. Today, I waited 60 days in one in Royal Oak. So it's like, and that's, a lot of that is left over from COVID and a lot of buildup, and there was a moratorium on evictions for during COVID. But you're at least 2 to 3 weeks before you get into court to evict these people.
Right.
Then the judge is always going to give them 10 days or
some amount of
time to actually get out. So let's say it goes perfect. You're 30 days tied up. If the poor buyer has sold their other property or closed on their house or is getting, is ended their lease or whatever, they could be without a house that they paid for because the seller is a holdover tenant.
Yeah, and then what happens if because now the holdover is the rent, essentially. But what happens if the previous owner who's staying in the house, when they're moving out, they bang holes in the wall or they shatter the bathroom mirror, or they
spill
water damage in the basement as they're moving out. They hit a pipe or something. There's no security deposit. There's no amount being held to hold against. So now you got to go to court again if they refuse to pay for any of that.
Yep. I mean, it is. It's ugly. And again, these things all work out as long as everybody does what they're supposed to do and does it to that degree, right? I mean, the purchase agreements do read that up until the date of possession, the property's to be maintained by that previous owner
as they previously
in the
had
same condition as of the date that they bought this house. So I mean, there's language.
Or then what?
Well, it does have language there, but to collect that money, depending on the amount of damage, you may be better off just fixing the damage yourself because you hire an attorney, take them to court, do all the other running around to get this cured.
Yeah.
You may spend. It's throwing good money after bad.
Right.
I do see more often than I used to, people asking for security deposits. And here's a strange thought, right? You have a homeowner, it's your mom and dad, and this is the house they raised their family in there, and they've been there for 40 years. And some buyer says, I don't trust you enough not to wreck this house on the way out. I want 10 grand of your money put in a security deposit escrow account until you move out. Now, I got two schools of thought there, right? Going, first of all, that seller may be slightly insulted by that.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
for sure.
In this aggressive market, buyers trying to get houses, do you think they're going to use that to secure that offer?
Oh, no. Everybody was giving free occupancy, 60 days, $0 occupancy, which may be even a bigger problem.
Right? Because now there's no money.
Yeah, now there's no money.
Right.
There's no money, and
what if they stay?
Typically, you'll have a clause in the escrow agreement that says if you don't move out on this time, it's like 1.5 times the daily rate. Well, what's anything times 0 is 0. So 1.5 times 0 is still 0.
Right.
20 times 0 is still 0. So yeah, it could really put the buyer in a bad position or the seller in a much stronger position.
But it almost
what
seems
if they don't
like
move out?
it just seems like there should be some type of mini lease agreement in effect for the 30 days or 60 days. But
there should be.
Again, like you said, you're going to ask for a deposit now or
on somebody that's lived there for 40 years.
Yeah.
And there should be. There's no doubt legally there should be. But the problem is 99% of the people do exactly what they said they were going to do. They move out when they say they're going to move out.
Right.
They're coordinating with you, and yes, occasionally they need a couple extra days, and
they can work
the
it
buyer
out.
Works it out. The buyer accepts.
Yeah, because typically the reason you're asking for occupancy is where you're going to isn't ready yet.
Correct.
And you're also anxious to get going.
Right.
It's not just like a scam to stay in the house for free.
Yeah, that typically doesn't happen. So that's why the purchase agreements are a little loosey-goosey with that kind of stuff. So
and think about it too from that seller standpoint. If somebody's asking to put some money in reserve for damage deposit on the way out, if you really intend on giving the property in that same condition, what's the big deal? You're going to get the money back. Here's where it becomes ambiguous and a problem. Now, who decides that it's in the same condition? The seller's going to say, just like you bought it. But I go, no, that mark on the wall wasn't there.
I didn't notice that stain.
I didn't see that stain or that stain on the carpet or whatever. And so those are the things when, realtors now they try to play attorney or try to come up with stuff to cover all these scenarios.
Yeah.
And it really is nearly impossible to do.
Yeah, because even in that case, typically we do a walkthrough, within 24 hours of closing. But now that you have occupancy, you kind of have to do 2 walkthroughs. You got to do one before the closing and one before you get the keys.
The reason you do the walkthrough is to make sure they didn't steal the chandelier or whatever, right? Well, they're not going to take it until they're going to move out 30 days from now. And then the closing has already happened. So it's almost useless to do a walkthrough because
unless you're taking pictures.
Well,
documenting the condition of the property.
But they're not going to take the chandelier before the walkthrough.
Right.
They're going to take it 3 days before and swap it out with something else or whatever. So it's again, luckily 99% of the people do what they're supposed to do and it works. Yeah. But these are pitfalls that experience will show you that sometimes this does happen.
Yeah, and I've yet to see a purchase agreement that points out the availability of 2 walkthroughs. or people think, hey, we get another walkthrough, and I've had buyers agents saying we're going to schedule that last walkthrough.
Yeah.
What
walkthrough? It doesn't say anything about that.
Your walkthrough.
Yeah.
Well, we want the seller there. They're not going to be there.
Yeah.
Keys in a lockbox. Pick it up. It's yours.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, you've owned it for 30 days now. So, what good is another walkthrough?
Yeah, if you really want to get down to brass tacks, right? The day you close, if there's a 30-day occupancy period, that buyer should be filing a 30-day notice to quit. Or if there's a 60-day occupancy, 60-day notice to quit.
Yeah,
Because
it's almost
that
like
way,
this
once
should be
that
part of the
60-day
process.
comes, but think about a seller. You get this notice in the mail. Hey, you got 60 days to get out. What is this for?
Yeah.
This court document,
It
right?
feels aggressive.
I told you I was
feels-
going to move out in 2 weeks, and trust me,
Right.
I shook your hand, I did whatever, but
But if that was all part of the closing process, it would feel like it's smoother.
It'd be interesting to see if other states
how
do
they handle
something
it.
like that.
Yeah, that would
But,
be interesting.
you said at the last podcast, acting in good faith, negotiating in good faith. So again, as long as people do what they were supposed to do in the contract calls for, 99 out of 100 times, it's smooth as can be.
Yeah.
With those occupancy clauses, I've seen language on certain purchase agreements that'll say, hey, we're going to charge $30 a day. We're going to hold 1.5 times that amount, so $45 a day for the 30 days. So if you go past the 30 days, you're going to pay $45 a day to stay here.
Yeah.
Okay, what did you just do for the buyer?
you just gave
The buyer gave the seller permission
Seller
to stay.
permission to stay, yeah.
Because it gave them a remedy, right? You're supposed to be out in 30, but if you go past, you just got to pay 45
I'll just
days.
pay. I'll just pay
the extra money.
Yeah, I'm going to be there an extra 100 days, actually.
And the agents go, well, that's not what that meant.
Right.
I go, well, that's what it says.
Right. Again, being ambiguous.
So, ambiguous clauses.
Well, I'll tell you, there's one that's not about ambiguity as much as it is about legality. Sometimes agents will write about their EMD that it can be deposited by a certain date. What do you do when you get an offer that has something like that? Or if we had an offer and then all of a sudden someone's trying to send you an amendment to that to cover the deposit of EMD because they didn't do it within the 2 days.
Yeah, we all know the answer to that is you cannot change it.
You cannot. It's because
state law says it's got to be deposited in a financial institution within 2 business days of seller's acceptance of the purchaser.
right. So you can't put in a contract something that goes against the law.
No.
Right. So basically that's it. So that can be ignored.
Well, and here, let's clarify that too, because broker can hold an EMD indefinitely until within 2 banking days, weekends and holidays do not count, of a final acceptance of an offer.
In Michigan.
An agent has to turn over the EMD immediately to the broker. Right? So if, as an example, the buyer was getting some check and they weren't getting funds for 3 weeks, so nobody's in possession of that check, you could put language on a purchase agreement saying, hey, the earnest money will be deposited with the broker on X day.
Okay.
And then those same rules are going to apply. Once that agent gets it, immediately to the broker.
Turn it over.
Right. Broker has 2 days to deposit.
They don't trust the agents with the money. They trust the brokers.
They trust
with
the
money. I don't know if that's better or worse or
No,
what.
I think that's a good thing. It's probably a good thing.
It is one of those things that, as long as we've been doing that, is still something that we have to remind agents about. And I get it. There's so many moving
because they
parts,
get busy.
right? People get busy, and I don't, especially today, right? This younger generation, check? What's a check?
right.
So they either have to go to the bank,
Yeah,
right? And have the money wired or Zelled or,
We ran into
whatever.
that with this condo that we own, and the other condo owner, he had never written a check in his life.
Ever.
Ever. He didn't even know. He don't know how to deposit a check. He doesn't know how to write a check. He doesn't have any checks. It's like, okay, how do you get money? Well, I Zelle or I,
Venmo
Cash App or
Yeah,
Venmo or
he's
whatever.
like, can't I just do this online?
Yeah,
And we're like, well, the
exactly.
account's not set up for it. And I was like, now you're going to be the one collecting the dues, and you're going to have to do this, and we're going to send you a check, and you're going to have to deposit it. All right, well, let's wrap this thing up then. I think it was a really good discussion because there's a lot of stuff, even though we're in the business and doing stuff, it's still good to hear how other people do stuff, and you can tweak your business.
Right.
So I hope people will get a lot out of it. Is there anything you guys want to add before we
No, I think that, just as far as ambiguity is what the topic was, if you do write a clause that is ambiguous, it goes against the drafter.
Oh, that's a good point.
We've been taught in every legal class we've ever taken. So if it's ambiguous, you're going to lose in court. So,
And I would tell people, test themselves. Use the or what.
Yeah.
If you write something, see if you can ask that question or what.
Right. Good
if
point.
you can answer or what, you can tighten it up.
Right.
Put a remedy to the clause.
All right, perfect. See you guys next week.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Peace out.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.